Greetings, students, and welcome to Week 11. This week, we're examining academic publishing, social scholarship, research impact, and open access. We'll explore credibility and evaluation, this time through an academic lens. We'll examine research impact, both traditional and emerging measures, including the altmetrics movement. We'll examine how scholars are using social media to connect and share their work. We'll also look at the open access and open data movements. And in part 2, we'll take a look at the emerging AI research tools. Our essential questions this week are: what are open access and open data, and how do they impact social scholarship? How has research impact traditionally been measured? What are some new strategies for measuring impact? And will the Academy embrace alternative metrics and strategies? And in part 2, we'll look at how AI tools might enhance academic research. All of this connects to many of our standards, most importantly in this particular case, the ACRL Framework for Information Literacy. One of the major frames, one of the 6 frames, is scholarship as conversation. And just to remind you, the description under that: communities of scholars, researchers, or professionals engage in sustained discourse with new insights and discoveries occurring over time and as a result of perspectives and interpretations. And under the frame, of course, you see knowledge practices. Learners who are developing their information literate abilities cite contributing work, contribute to scholarly conversation at the appropriate level, identify barriers to entering scholarly conversation, critically evaluate contributions made by others, identify the contribution that particular articles, books, etc. make to disciplinary knowledge, summarize the changes in scholarly perspective over time, recognize that a given scholarly work may not represent the only or even the majority perspective, and the dispositions under the frame. Learners who are developing their information literate abilities recognize they are often entering into an ongoing scholarly conversation, not a finished one, seek out conversations taking place in their research area, see themselves as contributors to scholarship rather than only consumers, recognize that scholarly conversations take place in various venues, suspend judgment on the value of a particular piece of scholarship until the larger context for the scholarly conversation is better understood, understand the responsibility that comes with entering a conversation through participatory channels, value user-generated content and evaluate contributions made by others, recognize that systems privilege authorities and that not having fluency in the language and process of a discipline disempowers their abilities to participate and engage. Consider these themes, these knowledge practices, and dispositions as we examine the various different areas in our academic explorations this week. Marky has a wonderful little video on academic publishing called Publish or Perish.
Have you ever heard the term publish or perish? It's still very much the law of the land in academe, but it's become more complicated with promotion and tenure committees no longer just wanting to know if a scholar has been published. They also want to know the impact of the scholar's publications. Let's see how savvy scholars team up with librarians who help them navigate this new publish, impact, or perish landscape. Once upon a time, a newly minted PhD secured a tenure-track position at a prestigious institution of higher education. We won't be too specific about our field of study because scholars in all fields are under the gun to publish, impact, or perish. The new assistant professor was very excited, but also a little nervous. 1 year later, she asked her colleagues where they thought she should publish her first journal article. "Publish in the exclusive journal of scientific endeavor," said one full professor. No, that one's out of date," said another full professor. "Publish in the top-notch journal of scientific inquiry." A third professor advised her, anyone in our field is publishing in the boutique narrow subfield scientific journal. What was our newly minted PhD turned young assistant professor to do? She hurried to the library where she consulted her friendly librarian who showed her how to look up journals in JCR, the Journal Citation Reports database. Together, they searched JCR for the exclusive journal of scientific endeavor and found out that although other scholars cited its articles, they weren't scholars from our young assistant professor's field. They searched JCR for the boutique narrow subfield scientific journal. It only published a handful of articles per year. Even worse, the boutique journal ranked in the bottom 25% of journals cited in the scientific endeavor field. The winner was the top-notch Journal of Scientific Inquiry, which published fewer than average number of articles per year, but they were cited so often that JCR ranked the top-notch journal in the top 10% of journals in her field. It was perfect for the young assistant professor. She submitted her manuscript to the top-notch Journal of Scientific Endeavor. It was accepted with minor revisions. Our young assistant professor was off to a great start on her journey toward tenure and promotion. As the years passed, our young assistant professor published more articles. Helping her to choose a journal in which to publish her articles was JCR. She searched JCR, checking its journal-level metrics to determine which journals in her field of scientific endeavor had the most impact. That is, journals that her peers read and cited in their articles. She was careful to choose journals that were ranked in the top 10% in terms of numbers of citations to their published articles. The full professors in her department told her she was doing very well. One day, her department chair called her into his office and said, "You only have 2 years before the Promotion and Tenure Committee decides your fate. Are your peers citing your publications?" The professor was shocked. It's not enough just to publish? They want to know if people are citing her publications as well? Quickly, the professor ran back to the friendly librarian. "Don't worry," said the friendly librarian. "We'll look at your bibliometrics and see how you're doing." They started with Web of Science and saw that the professor was becoming known despite being so new to the field. Friendly librarian said, "Give me some names of your young assistant professor colleagues, scholars who received their PhD at about the same time in your scientific endeavor." Our young assistant professor volunteered a couple of names, the friendly librarian showed her how to compare herself to the others, and our young assistant professor was both pleased and relieved that her bibliometrics were higher than her colleagues. And so it continued for 2 more years. The young assistant professor worked day and night, researching, teaching, collaborating, and writing. One day, her chair told her to compile her promotion and tenure dossier, making sure she included evidence that people were reading her latest publications. Off she went to the library. "Don't worry," said the friendly librarian. "We can check your altmetrics in Scopus and Public Library of Science to see what people are saying about your most recent publications and how many times they've downloaded them." Together they dug around and discovered that her latest articles were getting a lot of buzz. The assistant professor added this information to her dossier. She submitted her dossier to the Promotion and Tenure Committee. They put it under the microscope, checking everything and giving her promotion and tenure case a stamp of approval. Up went her dossier to the chair, the dean, the provost, the president, and the regents. Everyone agreed she had done her job well. She was granted tenure and crowned an associate professor. The end.
I think you can see the role of a librarian in advising a new professor. And also, let's think a little bit later in this lecture about the role the librarian plays in advising a new undergrad or a graduate student in academic research relating to bibliometrics and also altmetrics, which we'll look at a little bit later in greater depth. What Markey says about academic research. She says library users search citation databases not only to find relevant sources on topics, but to access the research impact of a particular journal article, or a particular researcher's publication record. Especially interested in research impact are college and university faculty who participate in employment, tenure, and promotion decisions. As the video shared, this is the bread and butter of academics. They pay close attention to it. And if you're an academic librarian especially, you need to be aware of what keeps professors and graduate students and doc students up at night. Let's take a look at some vocabulary. A refereed journal is a journal subject to detailed peer review following a defined formal process according to a uniform set of criteria and standards. What is peer review? It's the process of using predetermined reviewers or ad hoc reviewers who individually read a submitted manuscript and prepare a written review. A single blind peer review is the identification of the reviewer is not revealed to the author. In a double blind peer review, the authors and the reviewers both remain anonymous. What is systematic review? That's a rigorous literature review, usually in the health sciences, and it is based on clearly articulated research questions. It identifies all the relevant published and unpublished studies, assesses each study's quality, synthesizes the research, and interprets and summarizes the research findings. A literature review is an evaluative report on what is known about a subject, theme, current event, issue that strives to be comprehensive in certain ways. For example, covering a certain range of years, a certain genre, a certain methodology. You'll see these very often in doctoral theses as Chapter 2 or as a section in a scholarly article that you'll find published. In the sciences, and we referred to systematic reviews, you'll see that there are various different types of scientific evidence, and these types of scientific evidence are not all equal. A gentleman by the name of Andy Brunning is a chemistry educator located in Cambridge, UK, who's done these wonderful rough guides on his compound interest site. There's lots of infographics there. But I like the two I'm going to share with you that talk about the strength of scientific evidence, starting with very low strength of weight, which is anecdotal and expert opinions, moving forward into case studies and case series, and then case-controlled studies, and then moving all the way up to randomized controlled trials and systematic reviews. Not all science, as Andy says, is the same. Some evidence is ranked higher in the science community than others, and your awareness will help professors and students decide on which type of evidence, which articles to use in their research. Another thing to do, we talked about evaluation in a previous week. Science requires a slightly different type of evaluation. It is important to recognize how to spot bad science. Certainly, an obvious one is those sensationalized headlines that we see in fake news type articles. But also, you want to look for things like misrepresented results, conflicts of interest, which also relate to sponsorship, and that is something that should pop out immediately in who's behind the study. Problems with the sample size, unrepresentative samples used, no control groups, no blind testing, unreplicable results, and non-peer-reviewed material. So all of this you want to guide your scientific researchers to, especially as they evaluate articles to use in their own research. We mentioned systematic review earlier, and I do want to share for those of you going into health science librarianship a little bit of background on what the PICO process looks like.
When you're doing a search for health-related literature, PICO is a useful method for analysing the question. Health-related research questions can be complex. The purpose of PICO is to break down the question into its key concepts. Generally, health questions can be divided into these four components: patient population or problem, intervention, comparison, outcome. Okay, let's break down a question using PICO. In this example, smokers are our population group. E-cigarettes is our intervention or variable of interest. In this example, this is a type of treatment. Intervention can also be a diagnostic test, risk factor, or preventative strategy. Nicotine patches is our comparison treatment. Quitting smoking is our measurable outcome of interest. Other examples of outcomes might be decreased rates of smoking-related mortality or lower incidence of lung cancer. Now that you've identified these key concepts, it's time to use them to develop a search strategy.
So, how might you go about a search using the PICO process? One way is to use the TRIP database. And as you can see on the slide, there are a number of other medical and health databases that allow you to either use the PICO elements to search or that provide you information about the PICO process and the systematic search in their articles. It's important to note that there are versions, multiple versions often, of articles that are also published in these scholarly journals that we've been looking for and finding in these databases. There are also preprints, which are versions of academic papers that are released prior to publication in a peer-reviewed or scholarly journal. These are often not typeset and may be discovered free. Sometimes you'll find them on a scholar's website. Sometimes you'll find them via Google Scholar. You probably won't find a preprint in an academic journal database. You'll also discover postprints out there. They are peer-reviewed articles, and they are in preparation for publication in an academic journal. They may be slightly different from the final form that's published. Both of these stages may be referred to as e-prints. One way to find them, if you're working in science or mathematics, is this site that is sponsored by Cornell, which is called Archive, although it looks like a funny spelling of that word. It is a site that gathers scientific papers in mathematics, physics, astronomy, electrical engineering, computer science, quantitative biology, statistics, and quantitative finance. And you can access it online, and it is searchable, and it has more than 1 million records and is growing at a rate in 2016 at 10,000 items per month. So let's look at some trends in scholarly research. There is a shift away from a research culture where data and research products are considered as private assets and to a culture in which they are public goods. There's a growth of multidisciplinary research. We're developing common standards for communicating data and research. We're mandating an intelligent openness for data relevant to published scientific papers. And we're expanding the criteria used to evaluate research to give credit for useful research communications and novel ways to communicate. Among the movements that you'll see in terms of our trends are the open access movement, the altmetrics movement, and the open data movement. Open access is the unrestricted access to peer-reviewed scholarship on the open web. It's interesting, according to SPARC, the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition, that even though research is largely produced with public dollars by researchers who share it freely, the results are often hidden behind technical, legal, and financial barriers. Open access presents a new model for scholarly publishing, with unrestricted online access to articles published in scholarly journals. It permits users to download, copy, print, display, search, and link to information. It presents barrier-free access, removing price barriers like subscriptions, licensing, or pay-per-view fees. It removes permission barriers and most copyright and licensing restrictions. Among the principles of open access are that research data, when it's repurposed, has an accretive value, or the value increases. Public funded research should be public, available, and for the public good. Transparency in research is essential to sustain the public trust. The validation of research data by the peer community is an essential function of the responsible conduct of research. And managing research data is the responsibility of a broad community of stakeholders, including researchers, funders, institutions, libraries, archivists, and the public. There are actually two types of open access content. There is gold open access and green open access. Gold open access is delivered by journals that make all peer-reviewed articles freely available for online as soon as they're published, generally referred to as open access journals. Green open access is open access delivered by repositories or peer-reviewed articles deposited in open digital repositories, including articles not copy edited or formatted. What makes open access possible is that authors are the copyright holders for their work until or unless they transfer their rights to someone else, like a publisher. Scholarly journals generally don't pay authors for their research articles, which frees this special tribe of authors to consent to open access without losing revenue. Among the benefits of open access, OA benefits authors as well as readers. All authors want to cultivate a larger audience and greater impact. Open access increases a work's visibility, retrievability, audience usage, and citations, which all convert to career building, especially on the part of an academic. Readers can freely access scholarly articles to read, copy, download, distribute, print, search, or link to the full texts of those articles. Super discusses the scope of open access content. It is not limited to the sciences. It extends to the arts and the humanities as well. It's not limited to publicly funded research, but includes privately funded and unfunded research as well. It's not limited to present and future publications, but also includes past publications. It's not limited to born digital work, but includes work digitized from print, microfiche, film, and other media. It's not limited to text, but also includes data, audio, video, multimedia, and executable code. Among the places where you can find open access content is the Directory of Open Access Journals, which is a wonderful international portal, the Public Library of Science, and Sage Open. This is a screenshot of DOAJ, and it's very searchable and has some very interesting journals in it. And one of my favorites is First Monday, which deals with web and technology and information studies. Still, other examples include ORCID, which offers researchers a persistent digital identifier that distinguishes the researcher from every other researcher when folks are coming in contact with him or her. And so you can register for your ORCID number, and you can add your ORCID number to your research and any of your profiles, including on your website, and you can use it when you apply for grants. Major universities are going to great efforts to establish repositories of the publications of their scholars. You'll find the ORCID IDs are among one way that you can search them, and you'll find that it's not just the individual repository that's important, but the ability to search across them, especially the content there that is open. Open Door is a global directory of open access repositories and their policies. You'll see that I searched for our own Rutgers repository, and the RU core is located. There's a little image of it down there. And so it's important for you to be able to search across university content. Some of this stuff is gray literature, and some of it is not that easy to find. There's another one called BASE, which is from Bielefeld University, the Bielefeld Academic Search Engine. It's one of the largest search engines for academic web resources with 120 million documents from more than 6,000 sources. You can access full text for about 60% of the index documents that are open access. Beyond open access, you'll find that folks are figuring out ways to make journal articles that are behind paywalls available in both legal and some illegal ways. One legal approach is called Unpaywall. You can install a free browser extension for Firefox or Chrome and search legally across full-text research papers from a large index. At this point, it's largely science-focused, and it does not retrieve articles 100% of the time. As a librarian, especially if you're an academic librarian, it's important to know some access tricks. You may not be working in a library like Rutgers University, where you have access to so many full-text publications. However, there are repositories that maintain open access journals like DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals, and there are also additional types of browser extensions, buttons, and repositories, as well as other types of tools that will allow you to get preprints and free full text access to the journal articles that you may need for your patrons.
Now let's move on to some questionable strategies. It's no secret that librarians often use Twitter or X to request interlibrary loan materials to speed up the process. But across the world, people are using hashtags. They change from time to time, but right now, hashtag ICANHasPDF allows scholars all over the world, including folks who have no institutional connection, to get PDFs that they need for research, very often for health research.
Finally, you need to know in this particular category about Sci-Hub. And Sci-Hub was created by a graduate student from Kazakhstan in 2011 in reaction to the high cost of papers that were hidden behind paywalls and subscription databases. So she put together this place where people were contributing PDF articles. It's now up to beyond 70 million articles. It's a very popular place for grad students to go, and it is used globally. It is very controversial. Elsevier had legal action against it, but I want you to know that this is an active site where many people are getting their journal articles beyond the barriers of subscription databases and paywalls. And it has cycled through a number of domains and been blocked in some areas. What you'll find is that grad students who have access to universities, of course, in the West, are bypassing their university libraries because they find it so much easier to get access to articles in this one repository. And you'll also discover this addresses an issue in equity. Not everybody has access to a university library, and a lot of people rely on research articles. And so Sci-Hub fills an extraordinarily big demand, and yet it is not legal. So I want you to think about these issues as we move forward and as you move into practice. Let's look at open data. What is open data? Open data is freely available on the internet, permitting any user to download, copy, analyze, reprocess, pass to software, or use for any other purpose without financial, legal, or technical barriers other than those inseparable from gaining access to the internet itself. It is data that has value as evidence, reproducibility of results for validation, and for the utility of future research. Bolton tells us there are 4 facets of open data. Data must be accessible, readily found. It must be intelligible. It must provide an account of the results of the scientific work that is intelligible to those wishing to understand them. It must be accessible. Recipients need to be able to make some judgment or assessment of what is communicated, and it should be reusable. The data should be able to be reused for multiple purposes. In Science as an Open Enterprise, Bolton et al. Describes open data as an urgent issue and a realizable aspiration, suggesting that open data will close the concept data gap, maintain the credibility of science, exploit the huge data deluge and computational potential, combat fraud, address planetary challenges, support citizen science, respond to citizens' demands for evidence, and restrain the database state. Folks argue about whether open data is good or bad. Of course, in terms of its benefits, it will facilitate diverse analytical perspectives, enable replicable experimental studies, identify errors in research, refine or revise theories, reuse data in order to create further understanding or improve results, stimulate effective collaborative research among scholars across countries and disciplines, and boost investment of research in digital technology. There are some dangers. Folks worry that there's a potential threat to privacy infringement with the unintentional disclosure of personal data. People worry about data theft and academic fraud, as it's easy to cut and paste in open data. Or they worry about the lax quality and control of open data and ethics that potentially could go afoul.
Of course, the COVID epidemic created a greater need for us to share data all over the world. Open data became a lot more common during this crisis. We saw the emergence of open data from many cities and states. This is an example on this slide of New York City open data. Our government has always shared data, data.gov. You see the World Health Organization and a number of different organizations. And then we already looked at Google's open data sets.
Scholarly research has been impacted by collaborative information seeking. In fact, there are a number of portals in which scholars share their resources and work together in groups, and these are just a few of them, and I encourage you to visit a few of these. And then we have traditional metrics for scholarship that you may be aware of, and let's take a look at some of those. Traditional metrics for scholarship involve the publication of scholarly articles, the presentation and publication of conference papers, invitations to present papers, and the number of citations that your work receives. Bibliometrics is a study of this. It's the statistical analysis of written products of academic inquiry, scholarship, and research, especially in the form of journal articles, books, dissertations, theses, and conference papers. Simply put, it's a set of quantitative methods used to evaluate scholarly literature and scholars. There are article level metrics, which they're measures used to evaluate the impact of an article in a scholarly journal. There's the H index, which is an article level metric that's used to evaluate the impact of journal articles. An author with an index of H has published H papers, each of which has been cited by other papers H times or more. And there are some equations to help us figure that out. There are also journal level metrics. There's the Journal Impact Factor, or JIF or JIF, and it's one measure of journal prestige based on the frequency with which the average article in the journal has been cited in a given period of time. JIF can sometimes be manipulated by authors who cite their own work or play politics by heavily citing the work of peers to increase their research reputation. There's also something known as the eigenfactor. It's a score developed by Jevin West and Carl Bergstrom at the University of Washington, which rates the total importance of a scientific journal according to incoming citations from highly regarded or ranked journals, weighed to make a larger contribution to its eigenfactor than those that are poorly ranked journals. And you'll see these in a number of the sources that are coming up. So we used to have these really thick books that were released in paperback, quarterly editions, and bound annually. And these were kind of invented by Eugene Garfield, who is a founder of the bibliometrics movement, who leveraged citation data, how many times an article that you were holding was cited by other scholars or another article that you're interested in. And it helped us follow the citation chain or pearl growing before we had digital resources. It's interesting to note that although Garfield was noted as the founder, Shepard's, which was in the legal world a case citator, preceded things like the Science Citation Index, which Garfield launched in 1964 as a print source, the Social Citation Index, which came afterwards, and the Arts and Humanities Citation Index. These were major tools for librarians back in the old days when I was a baby librarian. But now we've moved to what's called a few sources that measure citations. And one of them is the Web of Science, which I believe many of you looked at in the Rutgers databases earlier in the semester. Web of Science covers a huge core collection, which is not only science, as you can see, it's social science, the Arts and Humanities Citation Index, as I mentioned before, conference proceedings, the Book Citation Index, current chemical reactions, and Index Chemicus. And you can see some of the indexes that are involved in the circle around it. So Web of Science allows you to do a cited reference search. And basically, if you play around in there, you'll discover that it helps you find an author's citation count. It lists papers that cited that author or that article. It notes the times that the article or the author was cited, and it identifies highly cited papers. This is just another look inside, and you can see that very often authors go by a number of names, and you can add all of those names to the search and gather them together. And you can also see some metrics about articles in a very direct way. So when you're working with a researcher and you are the information professional or the librarian, you can kind of discover which are the seminal articles, the ones that are most important to cite in many cases, and who are the seminal authors. Web of Science also has within it journal citation reports, which evaluates journals and their impact factor. You can see that within it, Insights Journal Citation Report, this is within Web of Science, allows you to compare journals and create charts. And also, you can use the eigenfactor, and you can see that that is actually down in that pull-down menu to the very left. You can look at GIFs, you can look at 5-year GIFs, you can look at an immediacy index, or you can look at the eigenfactor or an article influence score. So all of these are journal impacts. Elsevier has Scopus journal metrics, another way to measure a journal's impact. This is a peek inside of Scopus, and Scopus lists a number of ways to look at impact, and you can see that chart, and you can see a number of measures like SJR, IPP, and SNP for measuring journal rankings and impacts. This is just another look inside of Scopus and journals by rank, and you can see on the left that's a list of journals and a ranking number, and you can see that there is a journal number 1, which is Cancer Journal, and then the New England Journal of Medicine is number 2, and Chemical Reviews, and then Lancet and Nature Reviews. These are the journals that people most respect. It's interesting to note that you don't need to be in a database to find this information, although databases contain kind of more of it. But Google Scholar also lists a journal ranking within different areas of study. So the top one there is kind of overall, and then I looked at humanities, literature, and arts in the one that was on the bottom right. And you can see the Journal of Communication is on top in that one. So you can find this outside of databases as well. Similarly, you can find rankings for scholarship. Mine is not very impressive, but this is my Google Scholar profile. Any person who sets up a Google Scholar profile can add citations to it. And actually, that's my ResearchGate profile. This is another collaborative space where people can ask me for the articles that I've written. And if I choose to put my stuff in there, I can do that too. Now, there's so many of these that I don't really do them all, so that's something to think about. Where does a scholar live? If you search the LibGuide community, you'll notice that there are a number of academic librarians who are creating guides on research impact for their faculty and doc students and other scholars they serve. This is an excellent one from Cornell University, and it would be a great way for you to get up to speed on some of this, as well as a model for creating your own LibGuide as an academic librarian. We're also seeing some technology that help people understand their academic impact. This is Publish or Perish, and it is a downloadable piece of software that uses Google Scholar data to calculate metrics in terms of your total number of papers, the average total number of citations, average number of citations per paper, and the indexes that we just talked about. So if you know somebody who is a scholar, you might want to recommend this to them. So those are the traditional measures of bibliometrics, but you need to know that there are possible new metrics coming along. So in addition to those measures that we look at that have a lot to do with citations, what measures now exist in a social media world. Certainly, there are article views, but there's also downloads from those social media sources like ResearchGate and another academia.edu, for instance. What about the tweets that people do or tweet about your research, your presentations, and your publications? How many times your blog posts have been viewed? How many times people have commented on your blog posts, specifically when those blog posts talk about your research? What about videos, and especially TED Talks? How many times have your TED Talks been viewed and bookmarked and commented on? What about infographics and research posters that have been viewed or even developed based on your research? How about visits to your CV? How about your SlideShare or Google Slides? How many times have they been viewed and how many times have they been downloaded? How about your collaborations on the various different portals for social scholarship, like Bibsonomy and Mendeley? How about the followers you have on your blog or Twitter, people who have bookmarked your work, conversations around your work on forums, likes and favorites and shares and clicks and all sorts of other ratings? So you see, there probably are other ways to measure your impact. And a lot of people are arguing that it's not just bibliometrics, it's not just research impact, but potentially that social impact matters a bit. There was an article that I liked that reinterpreted Ranganathan's 5 Laws of Library Science, which I hope you're familiar with. Books are for use, every reader his or her book, every book its reader, save time of the reader, the library is a growing organism. They reinterpreted that in terms of research impact. Research is for impact. All research impact its artifacts. All research artifacts their impact. Save the time of the researcher, and research impact is itself a growing organism. Let's talk about how research impact may be measured in the future and how it's currently being measured in an emergent way. I'll play a little bit of this video for you.
In the dark hours of the 21st century, scholars rushed to the gates of powerful publishing corporations with the obligation to increase their scientific impact factor with obscure citation counts, opaque and unaccountable methods, mysterious H&M indexes, allowing approximations, gaming, and fatal errors. And as they wait for anonymous reviewers to cast their final vote, 90% are hit by the scythe of rejection. 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 Realizing they can liberate science, pioneering underground scholars engage with the internetatron and peer evaluation. They understand the value of spontaneous sharing. Their communications are dated and stamped by caring hands, encapsulated with portable private or public peer reviewing features, and the dissemination journey may now begin. Communications are automatically indexed by Google Scholar and shared by all on the Twittertron or exported to Mendeley, to Blogatrons, to Facebook, and to you name it. And as crowdsourced dissemination and peer reviewing take their due course, Total Impact uncovers the invisible impact of research, tracking its footprints across Mendeley, PubMed, Dryad, SiteYouLike, PLOS, research blogs, Twitter, Wikipedia, SlideShare, SourceForge, GitHub, and a growing host of non-traditional dissemination channels.
What are altmetrics? Altmetrics are alternative metrics, a new set of metrics that could describe relationships between the social aspects of the web and the spread of scholarship online. It's a new way to capture the impact of articles as well as research products, an alternative to metrics derived purely from a print-based understanding of scholarly research and communication. For example, it's helpful for clinicians and other health professionals who produce various types of research products, like videos, blogs, books, etc., in addition to the scholarly articles they might publish. And altmetrics is emerged because scholars have been upset by the fact that even though their work might be largely funded by public dollars, publishers often own the work of scholars. Scholars' work often is hidden in silos behind login firewalls where people have to pay lots of money in order to access them. There are other measures of social engagement, as you saw in the video, and as we started thinking about together. There's other evidence of impact, social, not just scholarly. The time it takes to make an impact with citations is not immediate. Citations take time to accumulate. Where, for instance, a TED Talk could go viral, especially if it talks about somebody's important research. In terms of bibliometrics, there is a discernible bias in terms of STEM, scientific research content, and humanities content doesn't seem to get the same notice. Data now is born digital. Research communication is web native. We're engaging in open science. So why not rethink the way we measure impact? The term altmetrics is attributed to Jason Priam. In fact, it was attributed to him in a tweet. He was a doctoral student in North Carolina, I believe, when he tweeted, "I like the term article level metrics, but it fails to imply diversity of measures. Lately, I'm liking altmetrics." So this is a definition that Jason Priam was responsible for the creation and study of new metrics based on social web for analyzing and informing scholarship. It notes here also that there's a hashtag for altmetrics if you want to follow it. And there are respective groups who are studying it on Mendeley, Google Groups, FriendFeed, and LinkedIn. Priam is also attributed for writing this manifesto about altmetrics, which describes the perceived need for new types of metrics beyond bibliometrics. First, let's look at altmetric.com. This one is owned by Macmillan, and it offers article-level metrics for researchers and publishers. What people know it for is its donuts, and those donuts actually give a score and mean something. You can get background in a number of the charts, you can get the geographical reach, but the donut that you see with a code below it is something that people actually take as a badge. So yes, there are definitely risks and benefits. It's a double-edged sword when you're looking at altmetrics. On campus, people say they don't have time for another type of metric. They don't believe this is recognized as legit. Folks believe this area is in its infancy or maybe it's toddlerhood. There's really actually limited awareness of this measure. There's a bias a bit against public library of science scholarship and crowdsourced evaluation. There's inflexibility relating to harvesting and feed options in terms of a promotion and tenure process. At this point, I believe there are too many competing systems. We've got this data in a whole bunch of different silos depending upon where you as a scholar want to play. There is at this point a lack of standards in the way we're measuring these things and in the metadata. University traditions die hard, and a lot of our scholars do not want to change the way they've measured things for a very long time. And some scholars wonder if it could negatively affect their reputation if they engage in altmetrics activities.
So summing up this week, we looked at credibility and evaluation, this time through an academic lens. We examined research impact in both its traditional and emerging strategies. We looked at social scholarship and collaborative scholarship, open access and open data. And by the way, we will be digging much deeper into open access and OER materials in an upcoming module. And in a brief part 2, we are going to just take a look at some of the traditional and emerging academic search tools.